This is the Piltdown Man, the biggest hoax in anthropological history. With a human skull and an ape's jaw, it misled the scientific community for decades. This is Charles Dawson, professional solicitor and amateur archaeologist. He's also the man responsible for the single most destructive fraud in evolutionary studies so far. Why? You might be asking, as you eat your Cheetos and like the video with powdered hands. That's gross, dude. Seriously. The Piltdown Man was thought by scientists for several decades to be a previously unknown species of early human. It even caused speculation that it was a missing link between apes and humanity. This blinded the scientific community to the true path of human evolution for years, wasted countless research hours on a farce, and ultimately created a scientific community far more skeptical than the one that had previously existed. This is the hoax of the Piltdown Man. In the 1880s, the Eiffel Tower is open for business, and a young man is making his way up in the world. Charles Dawson is a solicitor. He does law stuff. But hey, he's also got dreams. And in the 1800s, you can't blame an even somewhat well-off English guy for having those, no matter how much damage it causes. You see, Dawson was a hobbyist fossil collector, and in 1885 he was elected a Fellow of the Geological Society because of his numerous discoveries. This was just the start of Dawson's road to acclaim. He also co-founded Hastings and St. Leonard's Museum Association in 1889, one of the first museum associate groups in Britain. Dawson made his way onto the museum's committee and was named honorary collector by the British National Museum. I'm sure they feel the same way about that move, as the Art Institute of Chicago feels about giving Kanye an honorary doctorate. They weren't the only ones driving Dawson's acclaim within his community though. The Sussex Daily News named him the Wizard of Sussex because of his reputation in 1895. He was elected a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries in London. This was at 31 years old in old aristocratic Britain, without as much as a uni degree. Then in 1912 came Charlie Dawson's magnum opus, the Piltdown Man. Dawson made a number of discoveries in his life, and the Piltdown Man was not the only fraud among them. Around 38 of the specimens in Charles Dawson's antiquarian collection were faked, but this perpetration was by far the most devastating. Let's take a look at why. At the end of 1912, Dawson rolls up to a meeting of the Geological Society of London, claiming that a workman from Piltdown Gravel Pit had given him a skull fragment 4 years prior. Dawson told his fellows that the workman had believed it was a fossilized coconut and smashed it before he got there. This is a convenient basis for a forgery, as bones getting tampered with before a professional is on the scene, especially to this extent, removes all the context the site would offer experts. That context is crucial to the research behind the discovery, and I'll explain why. Imagine you find a small carved animal, like these ones at Karat and Tepe. In a vacuum, these could be tokens for war, game pieces, ornate weights. The imagination could get wilder and wilder, but because we know where and when they were found, in a small vase inside a ritual site before the advent of agriculture, with other depictions of the same animals in various forms of art, we can anchor our minds within that context and say that these are most likely storytelling devices. Smashing something to pieces not only removes that context but disturbs the piece, which would make it far easier to disguise fraud. Dawson had made several more visits to the site, finding more of those fragments and taking them to Arthur Smith Woodward, the keeper of the geological department in the British Museum. Woodward would then become a major part of Dawson's discovery. The two went back to the site before their fateful meeting in 1912, and they worked with each other, excavating from June to September. Importantly, Dawson recovered more skull fragments and the lower half of the jaw during this time. Another paleontologist, Pierre Teilhard Deschardins, participated in their discovery. While the scientific community has put Dawson down as a fraudster for his extensively faked collection and perpetration of this hoax, the people around him seem to have been played for fools, their reputation tarnished by their association with this devious man, though theories circulate on who may have been involved with him. In Dawson's announcement, he told those fellows that the skull he had found and reassembled resembled that of a modern human's, but had a smaller brain and a jaw nearly indistinguishable indistinguishable from a chimpanzee, our closest living relative today. You might see where this is going. If not, just quickly look at the video title again. Did you do it? Yes, that's correct. This cursed band of archaeologists were pushing the idea that they found a missing link, or more correctly, a transitional fossil between humanity and apes. This harkens back to an evolutionary idea called punctuated equilibrium, a form of change in speciation where species tend to keep a quite similar genetic code for long swaths of time due to them finding a good spot within their environment. This is their equilibrium, their stable state. When the environment changes, mutations suddenly have a far easier time carving out a niche from the new environment. And populations change very quickly because in a world of natural selection, the norm is no longer the best fit. After this punctuation of evolutionary change and speciation happens very quickly, the environment has settled and the species within it are now back in balance. This is why we don't see nearly as many transitional fossils as ones that are in that balanced state, because they had far less time and fewer members of this species to be preserved in the fossil record. 100 years ago, scientists discarded that whole process in favor of what's called gradualism, which is just constant change over time. And while some fossil records do have that trajectory, the expectation that all species changed in that way meant a discovery that linked humans and apes more closely would be absolutely groundbreaking, as proof for evolution. Now, like we said before, those other archaeologists getting played like fiddles would have been absolutely chuffed to put their name onto this discovery. But I'm sure you're seeing why a bad actor would have an incentive to orchestrate it. Context aside, the skull was controversial immediately when the news broke. Another model created by Royal College of Surgeons used copies of the skull fragments to create a different, far more human reconstruction of the skull. Arthur Keith was the creator of this version and argued that the version Woodward and Dawson had produced made no sense with its ape-like teeth. Dawson's group went back to the excavation site and inexplicably found a tooth that matched their jaw and design perfectly. Then Pierre got drafted. Anyway, Woodward thought this would silence his mate Arthur Keith, but instead he continued the debate, saying that the side-to-side chewing that humans do would be impossible under their model. For those of you who watched the last video, we're back into scientific beefing territory. Another anthropologist then sided with Woodward at their next big Royal Society meeting and told everyone Keith's opposition was motivated entirely by his own ambition, because apparently we're in Game of Thrones now. Keith later said that was the end of their friendship. And if you're feeling bad for Keith for getting dogpiled, for being less wrong than his contemporaries in this moment, I might just add that he was also a proponent for scientific racism, where silly little twats get together and misappropriate biology to argue for their own racial superiority. And he argued in favor of some version of the Piltdown Man for decades, only admitting to it being a hoax shortly before his death in the 50s, when the cat was squarely out of the bag. So don't go feeling bad for him or anything. Elsewhere, other people were scrutinizing the claim. David Waterson of King's College, London, published a conclusion in 1930, just 1 year later, that the sample was clearly an ape jaw with a human skull. A French paleontologist called Marcelin Bull said the same in 1915. An American zoologist called Gerrit Smith Miller Jr. concludes that the jaw came from a fossil ape, and a German-American anthropologist named Franz Wiedenreich said that it was a modern human skull with an orangutan's jaw that had its teeth filed down. As you can see, there was opposition, but for the next few decades, it was still by and large accepted by the scientific community, which of course would guide their efforts to continue research during that time. In 1915, between the arguments of the community, Dawson claimed to have found fragments of a second skull, 3 kilometers from the original find. Dawson refused to reveal the location and died the next year. This was taken as more evidence of the Piltdown Man's authenticity, the second skull, not Dawson's death. Henry Fairfield Osborn, the president of the American Museum of Natural History, said they belonged together without question. Even turbo-racist Arthur Keith accepted the Woodward model around this point. For 40 years, scientists were pushed down a dead-end road researching early humans. The accepted belief was now that the brain expanded before the jaw got used to new types of food, as the Piltdown Man suggested. Early human fossils, like an Australopithecus finding in the 1920s, got ignored for not conforming to this thought process. Whatever industry you're a part of, think of the effects if those 40 years were spent in slow motion. That's what happened to the study of early humans at this time. Hundreds of papers were written in reference to the Piltdown Man, either affirming it, rejecting it, or using it as a basis. If that hoax never existed, that time and money could have gone to far more helpful research. We will come back to the effects this had later, but first, how did this fraud get exposed? Radiometric dating is a technique to determine the age of carbon. Basically, radioactive materials decay, and so by looking for the amount of naturally occurring radioactive particles compared to the amount of decay in a given sample, you can determine its age, not just relative to what's around it, but in absolute terms. If this technology were well developed and accepted when Dawson presented his findings, he'd have been laughed out of the room because instead of a several 100,000-year-old single-aged specimen that he claimed he had, they would have found a 600-year-old skull, a 500-year-old orangutan jaw with it, and some fossilized teeth. Fortunately for Dawson, this technology was only emerging from infancy in the 20th century, so the dialogue was reliant on a bunch of educated people arguing about how it looked. Then, of course, there were the discoveries being made that went against the idea of the Piltdown Man's existence, like that previously mentioned Australopithecus and Homo erectus. This comes with the territory of being a massive lie. Both of those early hominins had solid bases for their own place in the early human pantheon, with small brains and adapted jaws that directly contradicted the pathway shown by Dawson's Piltdown Man. This eventually led to science treating the Piltdown Man as its own aberrant line of human evolution, that somehow made it to England not long ago, despite all other hominins taking a different pathway. Until, at the British Museum, 3 men develop a new technique called fluorine absorption dating. The longer a specimen has been underground, the more fluorine it can be expected to absorb. These men were Kenneth Oakley, Wilfred de Gross Clark, who I know I'm mispronouncing, and Joseph Wiener, whose name I know I'm not mispronouncing. Now, this technique allowed many prior findings to be re-examined, and they weren't just going to sit around and not do that. When the Piltdown Man got put on the block, they found those differences in the age of the jaw, teeth, and skull. And in late 1953, they published evidence that brought together all the critiques 40 years beforehand, stating that it was the compilation of a medieval human skull, a 500-year-old orangutan's jaw, and fossilized chimp teeth filed down. They added that someone had created the appearance of biological age by staining the bones with iron and acid. Their investigation got the teeth out under a microscope, and that revealed file markings on them. This revelation caused the instant removal of the Piltdown Man from the evolutionary record and the re-evaluation of nearly half a century of anthropological research. Luckily, the Piltdown Man was already starting to get cornered off in human studies as its own divergent line, because scientists are good at their jobs and were giving credence to the Australopithecus and Homo erectus. But the time that this wasted was not negligible. Of course, this discovery also caused the re-examination of all of Dawson's studies, where the investigators found that the amateur career Dawson had cultivated such a prestigious name from was founded on fraud, forgery, and planted evidence. In addition to Dawson, the Piltdown Man suspect list has a few noticeable names: Pierre, supremacist Arthur Keefe, and the Sherlock Holmes writer Arthur Conan Doyle among them. Dawson has been marked in recent years as the primary conspirator for obvious reasons, but there was debate on whether he acted alone. There is seemingly an endless web of connections and arguments to be made about who and why. For example, Arthur Conan Doyle's motive could have been to get revenge on the scientific community for debunking a favourite psychic of his. I'm not going to go into all of this now because the video would surely become a complete mess, but if this one does well, maybe we can go back to that later. Then of course there is the scientific side of things. A hoax like this was always going to embolden creationists and pseudo-archaeologists to voice beliefs that the scientific community is lying to everyone, as if you couldn't see by what we've looked at this video that scientists were the ones contesting Dawson from the start. This case can in an instant turn the respectable field of anthropology into a pissing contest between scientists and creationists over whether or not evolution exists. So thank you for that one, Dawson. On the upside, the fact that this farce went on for so long forced scientists to re-examine the rigor that was applied to the scientific method. Since then, research has been made more transparent, and findings have much of their credibility linked to whether or not they are peer-reviewed. Overall, the Piltdown Man did so well because a man with the right reputation was able to hijack an unprepared scientific community. Dawson used the belief that brain growth preceded diet change and the abject racism of the largely European and American scientific community, who expected the first clever humans to come from Eurasia, to create a hoax that conformed to those ideals. Even today, the Piltdown Man is discussed to shine a light on the damage that scientific malpractice can cause. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like, subscribe, it'd mean a lot. Make sure to comment your favorite scientific hoax down below. Laters.